201.
Well, I'm getting
Better than I thought.
I'm getting there.
Right. Very good. She's got the egg on time for you. She's got it all ready for her.
Yes, teacher.
Oh, she is so my sister.
Yes, teacher.
You know, it's a good thing to have enough sisters for all of us.
I know, Lucy.
Bubbles.
Okay, can someone have opening prayer for us?
Sure, I will. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to invite your Holy Spirit here, Lord. Be present with us and increase our knowledge and the things that you would have us know and understand. Bless Lori, Lord, and bless her lips, Lord, as she's standing up in a position where she's going to testify of you and in your word. And Lord, give us all eyesight to see those things that you would have us know and that will prepare our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We had gone through the 7 parts of this vision, right? And so the 5th was the little horn. And do you remember what the 6th and the 7th were? Daniel 7, verse 9. So verse 8 talked about the little horn and Ancient of Days, and then the end of figure 10, the court was seated and the books were open. So part 6 was the judgment. And then do you remember the final thing that correlates with the great mountain, the 7th? Because we're doing the 7th.
Verse 13 and 14.
Right. And so that was Jesus' kingdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus' kingdom comes. And so remember I told you that this same sequence and this same thing was going to be repeated 2 more times in Daniel 7. Okay, so we're going to take up verse 15. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to 1. Do you remember who the 1 and 2 is? It was by the river. He was by the river.
Jesus was 1, right?
Yes. Who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are 4 kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So that's just kind of a short summary to give the basic points, okay? Then I wish to know the truth about the 4th beast. So remember, we're making this list of the characteristics of this little horn, right? You have that handout with you, right? Oh, look at that. Cynthia pulled it right out.
I have it. We weren't here last week. I shared it.
I don't know why I did mine. I just had it both in his hand. Okay, so he wants to know the truth about this little horn, which was different from all the others. So if you're writing down, we started a list the other day about these. Exceedingly dreadful, teeth of iron, nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and about the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes in the mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. Okay, so there's the description of the little horn. Spoke pompous words, an appearance greater than his fellows. So on our list we have, comes up from Rome. We have the uproots, the 3 that fell. We have speaks blasphemous words. Do you remember we looked up those texts and what it means when you speak blasphemous words? Okay, so now, the second time where you see the repetition of the little horn, the judgment, and Jesus' kingdom is in verse, well, first you see the little horn in 21. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. So there's the little horn power. Until the Ancient of Days came and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So there's the kingdom again. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth, trample and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 2 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones. He shall subdue 3 kings. Okay, we already just read that, so it's a repetition that tells you it's important, right? He shall speak pompous words against the Most High.
That's repetition too.
He shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and intend to change times and law. So change times and law.
Which is happening.
So we know that that little horn power, what's the law he changed?
Sabbath.
Right.
Commandment.
So he changed the Sabbath to Sunday. And John addressed the times he changed. Of course, the papal power was recognizing themselves in this prophecy. And they didn't want everyone else to recognize themselves in this prophecy. So they came up with that dispensationalism that took the focus off them as that power. And
No, that wasn't exactly, historically, that's not exactly it, but it's close. The modern dispensationalism started in the early 1800s, but it was based on Jesuit writings from the 16th and 17th century, when the Protestant church was growing and people were beginning to recognize that the papacy was not following Scripture. That there were so many different parts of the Bible that did not jive with what the church taught. That the two didn't align.
Okay.
So those were the origins of modern day dispensationalism are in the writings of Ribera and Lucanza. I think, don't quote me on this, I'll have to go back and double check, but I think it was Lucanza and Ribera were 2 Jesuits that wrote what are considered now preterism. Jesus has already come. It was Antiochus Epiphanes, was the end. And futurism, which takes the 70th week of Daniel and throws it somewhere way off in the future, separate from all the rest of the prophecy.
Okay. So changing the time
But that's the changing of the times,
is
right?
related to changing the interpretation of the Daniel time period.
Right.
Can we say that?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I've also heard it said that changing times and laws refers both to the Sabbath.
Right.
Because Sabbath is times and law.
Okay, so then verse 25, then the saint shall be given into his hand. Then the saint shall be given into his time for a time, times, and half a time. What's a time?
A year,
What's times?
2 years,
What's half a time?
half a year,
How do we know
far
that?
apart.
Ask Siri. It's just common knowledge. Hey Siri, what's a time? She'll tell you it's a year.
It's a biblical year based on Genesis.
So 3.5 years. What does that mean? The saint shall be given into his hand for 3.5 years. How many days is 3.5 years if you're using prophetic time? I think it's
1260.
1260 days, right?
160 days.
538 to 1798. In Revelation, it talks about 42 months. So it's all the same. 3.5 years, 1260 days, 42 months. That was the time of Papal Rome's dominion. All right, so verse 25 talks about the little horn power. And then 26, but the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. So there's the judgment. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And that's the same as here. You know, it talked about Rome and the rock and the great mountain.
And the significance of doing it 3 times, is the significance of threes? Or is it just that it's a great?
So many things in the Bible repeat 3 times.
Right,
You know,
so-
and yes,
right,
I think it
that's
just
right.
tells you it's important.
It's
Okay,
when you
that's
see something,
important.
when you see something 3 times over in scripture, especially that close together,
Mhm,
you really are wanting to pay attention.
mhm.
This is God's way of trying to get my
Right.
attention, saying, hey,
Yeah. And remember, we also talked about, you know, when it's in poetry form, there's something really
Yep.
important.
Yeah.
And notice how much of that is in
so
poetry.
it's 3 times in poetry. So it's like screaming, hey,
Okay.
look at this. This is important.
Okay, good.
So 3 times it tells you the outcome of who's the true king, right? Who's the true king? Because what is this power trying to prove?
That they're the true king.
Yeah.
That they are the power.
Yes. Daniel 7 is about kingship. Who's the true king? Now, do you remember when we first studied about kingdom dynamics, there are 3 parts to a kingdom?
Right.
What are those?
Deity, priestly, and kingdom.
No, the other one, even further back than that. You know, you have a king, but the king has to have
Has to have, you have to have a dominion, land, there has to be
Domain.
something, some space, some portion,
Yeah.
some area, whatever,
Right.
borders, or
And it
something.
has to
To
have
be king.
subjects.
You have to have
and
subjects,
such. Exactly.
and
So,
you have to have law.
Yes.
right, so Daniel 7 is about the king. Daniel 8 is gonna be about the domain
Mm.
and the subjects. And the subjects in Daniel 8 is, we're called stars. And the domain, you'll see the language really changes to sanctuary language. You know, we're not talking about lions and beasts. In 8, we're starting to talk about goats.
Why does it say stars?
We're stars. When it talks about subjects, you know, in the kingdom, you know, there's the domain and then there's the subjects, the people who are under the king. And we're referred to as stars.
I never won these stuff. You always
The main
wanted to
subjects,
do
you said there were 3 parts.
Now you are.
The king, the domain.
It's
Oh, the
online
king.
and
Right.
one.
So Daniel 7 is all about who's king, who's the true king. Okay, and then Daniel 8 is gonna be about the domain and the subjects. And in Daniel 7, the papal power is presenting as a king in a political sense.
It's a little bit different.
Where did you say that?
In 7.
Daniel 7. In Daniel 7,
Okay.
the papal power presents as a king, and it's a political king.
Right. Because that's where he's headed.
Yeah, and in Daniel 8,
Yeah.
he presents in a religious form. So in 8, he becomes a priest.
You know, it's interesting about that. And wants to be both a spiritual king and a political king, because that's who Christ is, right? The form of Melchizedek, who was the high priest as well as king. So it's kind of fascinating to think about that. You think about the deception or the counterfeit versus the truth.
Right.
He's trying to put himself up as a form of Melchizedek.
Because remember, what did he say, little horn? You know, what was horn symbolic of?
A kingship, kingdoms.
And Messiah.
Yeah.
Messiah.
Oh, that's what you look for,
Messiah.
yes.
Yeah, so little horn,
Little Messiah.
the little Messiah, that's the whole counterfeit, that's the Antichrist.
In
But
Luke,
also-
in Luke, we read about the horn of Israel's salvation, which is Messiah.
Right.
Right, but the horns in this sense were to identify kingdoms. So that's what I was correlating that with.
Right.
It was a kingdom that came up
Right.
amongst the other kingdoms.
Right. Yep.
So Lloyd, why do you put sanctuary next to domain?
The sanctuary language.
The language in 8 is going to change just from
From king
Daniel
language.
7 is basically kingly language. You know, the courts were seated, the judgment was made. You know, the Ancient of Days on the throne. It's all king. It's kingly language. It's stuff we consider. You know, the court was seated. The king has a court that's on his throne. It's all stuff you equate with royalty. But when we go to Daniel 8, it's going to change to priestly language.
So the three parts of the kingdom are the king, his domain, the place he rules over, and then the people he rules over.
Yeah.
So Daniel 7 is about the king, Daniel 8 is about the domain and the subjects.
Yeah.
So let's just go back to verse 13 for a moment. I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man. How do we know that's Jesus?
Well, that's what it's called. The Son of Man.
And that's what Jesus calls himself.
Right. Let's look at John 5:27. And can somebody read that when they find it?
And have given him.
Oh, start with 26. Sorry, I hate it when they start in the middle of a sentence.
John 5:26. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and has given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man.
That's
Okay.
actually the words of Christ.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the words of Christ. So he is the Son of Man. So, you know, there's no question that, you know, that final kingdom that's going to prevail is going to be Jesus' kingdom. Okay? So we should get a lot of comfort from that because we know the end. Okay, so the other point in Daniel 7 that we'll make goes to this sheet, the attributes of the little horn. So we spoke about speaks blasphemous words against the Most High, changes the time.
Christians.
Yeah, and then notice speaks blasphemous words. There's some text from the New Testament. Did we look those up before? So let's do those. John 10:33, are you getting that? Mark 2:7. And can you get 1 John 4:3 and 2? And 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 to 10. Nothing for me? I'm sorry, I ran out.
Second
Sorry,
Thessalonians
I'll get you. 2 Thessalonians 2. Why don't you read half of it? 3 to 10. We read 3 to 6. And Danielle can read 6 to 10.
This is regarding speaks blasphemous words.
Okay.
The Jews, okay, so go back to 31. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. They were going to stone Jesus. Jesus answered them, "Many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of those works do you stone me?" And then the Jews answered him, saying, "For a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy. And because you, being a man, make yourself God." So blasphemy, in this respect, is when somebody forgives sin or makes themselves God.
Okay, Cynthia?
Got Mark 2:7. Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone?
Okay. And we went to 1 John, right?
Yeah, it says 4, 3, 2, but I'm gonna read it 2, 3. Does that make more sense?
It's actually 2 Thessalonians, but that's okay. Go ahead and read
Oh,
it.
is that what, oh, that's why, okay, so but 3 starts in the middle of the sentence.
Yeah.
By this you know that the Spirit of God, every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world.
Okay, so who's writing this?
So this is Paul to no,
No,
it's
this is
John.
John.
This is John writing.
Yes, Danielle says it's John.
Yeah.
And so John was already feeling the power of Rome, right?
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
he
Yeah.
saw it coming. You know, he lived through this, and he sees what's coming.
Yep.
Second Thessalonians
3 through 10, and I'll start with 3.
Yay.
Right, 3 through 10, and I'll start with 3 and drop off at 6.
Okay.
Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called of God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? And now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time.
Okay, just stop there for a second. What other name? Son of perdition.
Man of sin.
Man of sin.
What was the scripture again?
2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 10. Mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the world, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved.
Who's the restrainer?
Spirit.
Pagan Rome.
No, the Holy Spirit.
No, it's pagan Rome. Pagan Rome was the restrainer of papal Rome. It was not until pagan Rome was out of the way and gave their power to papal Rome that it became that papal Rome had its power.
I could follow that.
And if you look back at Romans, not Romans, but Daniel chapter 7, when it talks about those 10 horns,
Right,
which
right.
were
We
pagan,
discussed
that's
that.
because the fourth beast is pagan Rome,
the Vandals and the
and
Ostrogoths.
those 10 powers were the 10 kings that came out of that Roman Empire. 3 were plucked up by that horn that came out from amongst them, and that horn was papal Rome. Papal Rome.
Okay, so that was
Rome.
476 when that actually got it. Yep. And
Yeah.
that led to
So that's-
538.
Yeah, that was the restrainer. It was always pagan Rome was restraining papal Rome.
Happening now.
But who ultimately?
Until they gave the
has
power
the
over.
restrainer?
Until they gave the power over.
Ultimately,
God.
of course, God is
Yeah.
the restrainer
Yeah.
using
Yeah,
pagan Rome.
yeah.
Right.
But I think, God always pulls the winds back.
Yeah.
Okay, so these were the names we came up with. You're adding, to your list: son of perdition, man of sin, mystery of lawlessness, and lawless. Okay, so it's important to realize that this power wanted to usurp the true power of the king, and we call that the Antichrist. But the Antichrist isn't one person or one
It's a
man.
system.
It's a position,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the one we read in John said the Antichrist is in this world. Is it working in the world now? The Antichrist, the spirit of Antichrist, is working in the world now. And John wrote that somewhere towards the end of the first century. I mean,
70 AD, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually it's a power.
It could-
It's a
Right.
system.
Just as the Elijah message was a message that was started in Elijah's time, but it was a message that carried into John the Baptist's time, and it's a message that Malachi says is going to be for our time as well too.
Right,
That principle of Antichrist is the same thing. It was there in Paul's time, and he sees it. He sees it marching right along.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that.
Antichrist is always going to parallel, right? Isn't evil always going to parallel good, right?
Mhm.
It's going to come up when
come up alongside both kingdoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, mature alongside each other.
The counterfeit, right?
Right.
And counterfeit always going first and true.
Yeah. So as righteousness increases, so does evil mature. So
Yeah.
those processes are going up at the same time.
Where sin abounds, the scripture says grace abounds more.
Yes.
The Spirit is raising up a church.
Yes.
Raising up
Yes.
a people for God.
Yes.
And and as Satan sees that happening,
Yes.
he is also forming his government
Yes.
or his church and his way of believing. And so it comes up and it opposes the word of God, which is coming out of his church. Does that make sense?
Well, it's the opposite of what Sue's saying.
But if you see right from the beginning,
Right, but it appears
yeah.
that Satan is more powerful and then is going to win. In essence,
And
is that
that
kind of?
is not.
Yeah, no,
Right.
and I don't even think of as power either, even though, but it's that spirit.
Yeah,
Just that same spirit that was in the Garden of Eden, right?
Right. we
You know,
don't necessarily.
Even though God was there, you know, that it grabbed the minds of humanity in our lower nature, in our lower, you know.
So
I think-
we don't necessarily see God's Spirit working on individual hearts,
No.
but Satan does. And so that's why he's rising up his kingdom at the same time, trying to usurp that power and push down that power that God is raising up. So it may not be perceived that God's church is rising, and it's predicted that it will look like it's going to die, but God always prevails. But that's why we just need to hear his spirit and grow with his church.
Well, I agree with all that.
I hear Sue. I think I have a word picture. I pulled something out of the Bible from 30,000 feet. I think I have all my notebooks. If you go through although they're scattered, someday I'm going to make a master book. If you read the book of Judges, where you talk about how does evil come first, why is it all,
Right.
if you look at what happened to the nation of Israel over and over and over in Judges, because that's basically, the whole book of Judges is raising up, God raises up a judge and Israel gets better. They're caught in a loop. The people of Israel are caught in a loop. And it starts with, they sin, they're brought into servitude, there's supplication, crying out to the Lord, and then there's salvation. And then they go good for a while, and then they sin, servitude, supplication, salvation. Sin, the whole book of Judges is this never-ending cycle of these four, but the evil always comes first. The people forget, they do what's right in their own eyes. God releases that they're, God says, okay, you're going into captivity, you've got it. And then when they cry out to the Lord, he rescues them, he rescues them, he rescues them. And the Bible is full of evil winning or appearing to win.
Yes.
God's people crying out.
People choosing.
Choosing. And then God saving. He comes in, and whenever the time is right, he always wins. The salvation always comes. There's always.
I know.
So that's where the evil comes first.
I see the cycle, I agree with you, but God still comes first.
No. In
people-
appearance. In appearance in the world. There has
Because they abandoned God.
Yes,
You're right.
they
First
do.
they have God.
Yes.
Then
First they have God.
They step
Right.
out
Yes.
from his
Right, and
domain.
they sin over and over and over again. So I
Right.
get it, but
So,
I'm
no,
just struggling with this.
Well, like if you're looking at the world, let's look at today. Who's striving?
What seems to dominate is
It
evil.
looks like evil's winning, right?
It
It
does.
looks like evil's winning, right?
Right.
So the reason I was
No issue
laughing
with
at you is this morning's sermon was on Gideon in Judges, and we talked all about that pattern in Judges. And he wasn't
God is so good. And I wasn't there.
He was
Good job, John.
Yeah.
Here's the problem.
Amen.
God is so good.
But it's interesting also, there's one step in there, Sue, that people turn and seek God.
The supplication part.
Right?
Without the
So that
supplication part.
spiritual part is actually starting to grow because people realize their need.
Yeah, they're saying, yeah.
Yep.
So they're turning to God.
God's kindness leads to
His
repentance.
spirit is working on their hearts.
Thank you.
Okay, so that wraps up chapter 7. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, could you
More
go through that
questions?
all again real quick, please, for a second?
Summarize that. I hope you're all right.
So yeah, I can.
I was joking.
Oh, okay, we didn't read verse 28. We have to read verse 28. Go ahead, Brian, read 28.
This is the end of the account. This is Daniel 7:28. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart.
Okay, you want to go start chapter 8?
Here, I have a comment on this one.
Sure.
So if we go back to Genesis 1 and the creation, and again, my mind is thinking of chiastic structures, right? So you have the first 3 days of creation, and then you have the second 3 days of creation that parallel the first 3 days of creation. And then you have the seventh day that's just sort of hanging out
We
there,
talked
right?
about that, yep.
Okay.
How this all
work of Genesis 1, yeah.
So when we look at this, you've got that same 3 pattern, 3 pattern, 3 pattern, but what's the one hanging out here that we haven't really talked about? We did briefly, but so usually that 7th, in this case, is the 10th, is the climax, right? And so the climax here is, and he shall think to change the times and the laws. So that's kind of the seal of who all this is. I mean, you could talk about
yeah,
these
I see what
parallelisms, but you're still saying, well, who is this? And that's not only defines who it is, but again, it parallels the creation of, this is the Sabbath seal of creation, of perfection, and this is the anti-Sabbath seal of this political kingdom.
Right. Okay, so chapter 8. We already said it's gonna focus on the domain and the subject. So Daniel 7 was all about who was king. What's different about Daniel 8 to 12 compared to Daniel 1 to 7?
Shifts to the religious
Language. Yeah, it's written in Hebrew. Okay, so this language is written in Hebrew. The other was written in Aramaic, which was a more common language. Now it's written in Hebrew.
Everybody here? That's really, it's different.
Yeah.
Halfway, what we look at is in one language, in one book. It was written in different languages.
Yeah, that's like kind of two areas.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Well, it's all about kingdoms, to some extent. It's kingdom dynamics, it's kingdom
Well,
status,
remember,
kings.
every chapter in Daniel starts with the introduction of a king.
Right,
So the really important question.
1 to 7 is its own, is like it's a primer, and it culminates with the kings. Then we go to
Chapter
Hebrew, because now we're going to go to sanctuary language, to worship language.
There you
It goes to the language of God's people, chosen people. It's a different.
It's a spiritual language versus an earthly language.
Right, exactly.
Excellent, excellent. That's really, really good.
You know, it's interesting too, when you look through this, in Daniel chapter 7, we're talking kingly talk, right? Daniel is kingly talk,
Yes.
isn't it? And then Daniel chapter 8 is priestly talk.
Yep.
Daniel chapter 9 is sacrificial talk, right? Isn't that the lamb, right? In the midst of the week, he's cut off, right? So we're seeing the lamb there. The Jews present it backwards. Jesus came as the sacrifice. He went up to become the priest, and then he's eventually going to become the king. But the Jewish language presents it backwards.
Well,
The kingly,
Yeah, because it
priestly,
is
sacrificial.
if you think about it though, he hadn't been sacrificed yet.
Well, that's, yeah.
It's in
Yeah.
Daniel.
So
So
they're seeing-
it's
they're
a
seeing
looking
it.
forward, they're looking forward to
Yeah.
that sacrifice.
But looking at it in reverse, because
Yes.
he was going to be the...
Well, it's a perfect example of a broad-based chiastic structure,
Yeah. It's really interesting.
where it starts.
Remember that?
You know, it's because the layers in this book
Yeah, it's
never end. They're never end. So you think about it, it's king, priest, sacrifice. Then he becomes our high priest in heaven, and back to king.
That's great.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh, yeah.
it's-
Mhm. That's really good.
Can you do that again? All right, stop.
what's that?
I want that.
King,
Okay.
priest.
Here. I'll do
That would be an interesting thing to study out, is his first coming out as the sacrifice of the world, coming out of the sanctuary. Because we see how he goes back in, because we see the sacrifice and through the labor of washing, and then into the holy place, and then into the most holy place. But the first time, how do we relate that to his coming out the first time? Because we know he's coming out, because he comes out of the sanctuary the way you went in, but what about the first time when he came out?
Well,
Be
it's
interesting.
itself.
Interesting.
Had to come out of the heavenly.
So that's what, you know.
Yeah, he come out of the heavenly, he come to
He
here.
came out,
Well,
he's come here.
Yeah, he came out in his humanity, didn't he, though? Because each level, if you're to have to reverse and come out of the most holy place out, and then he goes into the
Was his-
courtyard.
Yeah, he came out as a
It's the
king.
reversal.
He
It's
came out as a
the
king, came to his wilderness experience, went through the labor of baptism, and then from baptism he went to be the sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's a macro chiastic.
Yeah.
Love your
Think
face,
about it.
Brian.
Yeah.
When you talk about the holy place being the wilderness, right? Learning dependence on God. He was learning about God.
Yeah.
He had to grow as well.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, you're right, you could go for a long
Popcorn.
time on that.
I smell popcorn.
Still popcorn.
Awesome.
Okay.
So that was a good segue.
Okay, so in Daniel, before we get to Daniel 8, we need to understand that there are two words for vision. You know, we just say vision, 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 but in the original language there are two words.
Murray and he's on.
Mirage.
Okay.
Like mirage.
What can you,
The word mirage.
Mara.
All the way to the
Mara is.
or do we need
I
that?
remember now we have
Do what you need to
got
do.
too much stuff in my brain.
I'll be quiet.
It's such beautiful.
Oh, no, I meant the whole board.
That's it.
I think I've got it in here somewhere.
Oh, Lori, that was the best drawing on there.
We can all,
Okay, so there was Hassan.
Hassan, the other one.
Was that An or O?
Hey,
He's the only
Oh,
one.
Hassan, yep.
Oh, okay.
M-A-R-E-H, or M-A-R-E-H, E-H, A-H.
M-A-R-E-N.
So what does this one mean versus this one?
I'm trying to pull this out of my brain, but I think Hazan is the vision, the actual full, complete vision, dream, the entirety of it.
The entire vision. And this word is used.
Refers to the time portion specifically.
Okay, so when Daniel is keeping the matter in my heart, how many years does he keep it in his heart before this new revelation comes to him?
Sounds like 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. Can you imagine? You know, we want things today and tomorrow. You know, 3 years he pondered this. So in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai.
that's right.
Yeah, so what vision do you think this is? Hassan or Marah? He's just talking in general about the entire vision.
This would be
right?
Hazan.
Yeah.
Hazan.
So
Yeah.
this is Hassan.
You
And,
headed?
and notice where he is. Where is he?
By the river.
By the river. Remember, the river always flows from the kingdom of God. Remember that? The river always flows from the kingdom of God.
Oh, right, or from the throne.
From the throne, yes, from the throne. So he's by the river.
Well, and in the citadel of Shushan, so it's the river flowing from the capital, flowing up by the capital, because Shushan, it's the place, it's the center of the central point of the kingdom, which would be the throne of God, the heavenly kingdom.
So he's standing by the river. I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Okay, so we know we're just following through, right? So this vision starts where? One is higher than the
The
other,
Medes and the Persians, the
in
bear, right?
balance of power.
Yeah, the bear, right?
That's still the Medo-Persians.
Right, so we're starting here with this vision. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no beast could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Okay, so notice the ram is great. So what direction is the ram coming from?
Westward.
From the east.
From the east. So he's going westward and
Oh, I see.
southward and northward, so he's coming from the east. Who comes from the east?
That's because it's just that he's gonna be eastern.
What's the eastern sky when he comes?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So why is this king coming from the east?
Oh, because he's the true king.
Yeah, he's the king.
Well, it's a God-centered kingdom. It's a kingdom based on God. God is still revered and considered to be the point of it, so to speak, the source of it. The Medo
Isaiah
versions.
45:1 is what you want to say, right?
I don't know, is it? Let me get to Isaiah 45:1 and I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yep, that works.
Anointed one. That's it.
Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors so that the gates will not be shut. All right, so Isaiah prophesied that Cyrus the Great, who's the king of the Medes and Persians, would liberate Israel. So Cyrus is a type of Messiah.
Yeah.
He symbolizes Christ in his kingdom. He's coming from the east. He's called the Anointed One.
How many years before that happened?
Yeah.
Did you put the Isaiah call? I don't have those.
Isaiah was
About 100 years,
700s.
wasn't
Isaiah was in the 700s BC.
So 100 and change.
So
It's,
Medo-Persians would have been, so for Cyrus would have, almost 200 years, close to 200 years before Cyrus even was born.
was
It's
born.
like predicting Trump in the 1800s.
Pretty much.
You're inspired.
And did Cyrus know this,
why they
this
coined it,
prophecy? Did Cyrus know this
Cyrus
prophecy?
Trump going.
Well, Cyrus was a conquering king, so he saw his kingdom as being superior. So no, he probably didn't know. That'd be my guess. Right?
But yeah, he look at all he did for Israel. I personally think he knew this. I think he read this and said, wow, that's my destiny.
Could very well be. I mean, his
Yeah,
wife.
well, because the Persian Magi were historians, astronomers, astrologers. I mean, they're the same people that were advising Cyrus. Their descendants were the Magi that came to worship Christ out of Persia. I mean, these are the same class of people. Cyrus's advisors. They would have been reading everything. They
Religious intellect?
are like religious intellect, but also reading history, reading these prophets, reading these prophecies. They basically started, came out of Balaam. Is considered, as I understand it, and again, I'm not the world's foremost authority, but Balaam's started an order of studiers, seers, etc., that became the Persian Magi and others in other parts of the world as well. They spread it.
Which goes along with, who's the one that went and destroyed everybody?
Euro,
No,
Alexander.
Alexandra, where he established his
Philosophy.
yes, and his intellect and all that in that nation. That's where everyone was going to learn, even everyone was going there.
Right, that's when Israel became Hellenistic, with Alexander the Great started that.
Yes.
But the other interesting thing is that he, as he expanded, actually went mad by having found what we're studying right now and seeing the parallel between himself and that his kingdom would not last.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Which we're going to get to soon. And it drove him crazy because he went mad with the thought that I've done all this and
Yes.
now what?
To not.
To not for myself anyway. Even though he had a great lasting impact, but the teaching, the bringing people to Alexandria, it became the library of the ancient world, Alexandria.
Verse 5, and as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So now where are we?
Coming from the west,
Leper.
Greece.
Alexander the Great. Talking about him, the big horn.
And it's singular now.
Singular horn, yes. And how does it describe? Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in the place 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Okay, so the ram was great, the male goat is very great.
That's Alexander.
So there was a great, and then there was a very great.
Yeah. And what direction did the male goat come from?
From the west.
West.
Yeah, so we think of Western civilization, right? Rome and Greece, yeah.
So you get the vision continues eastward, even though we're pushing from the west. The prophecy still goes eastward because there's still one more to follow.
Okay, so the large horn was broken, that was Alexander the Great, and in place of it, the 4 notable ones. And we know that Alexander had the 4 generals, right, that came up.
And that started the Ptolemaic Wars, which eventually caused Israel to invite Rome in. That's a long,
Yeah.
that's just a side note. I'm sorry.
Okay, and then verse 9.
You know, it's quite, you know, they talk about Alexander being this great general, right? But in that great battle that he fought against the Persians, he had a 50,000 man army, I think it was. And there were about 1 million Persians, you know, and all their conscripts and everything else. And they said it was this brilliant stroke that caused him to rout, you know, the Persian army. But I think God's hand was in it.
You think?
Well, I don't think there's any question about that, do you?
Yeah, but if you watch the History Channel stories about this, you know, they just credit him as like this brilliant stroke of strategy, you know.
Yeah, 20 to 1 odds, you know.
Causes,
People do that every day.
Yeah.
God's hand.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so we're down to our last verse for the day. And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great. So we went from great to very great to exceedingly great. Toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. What's the glorious land?
Palestine.
Right, so you always go up to the temple. Whatever direction you're going, you always go north to the temple. So the glorious land is north. The throne of God is always north.
Grew up to the host of heaven. Sorry, that was the end, wasn't it?
This is the end of this
Just
week.
couldn't resist, could you?
Oh, he's incorrigible.
So yes, we will get more attributes of our little horn from verse 10. Okay. Can somebody have closing prayer?
Are you sure?
No, you won't.
Yeah. Would you like to have closing prayer? I saw you raise your hand.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this moment of time that we can come and review Daniel 7 and 8, and thank you for the enlightenment that you have given us. Help us to see the reflections of your character, your kingship, that we can see the counterfeit from the real. We thank you for your glory and your kingdom, and that you have the patience with us to continue to bear with us even when we continue to wander away. Thank you for Lori and her devotion and this study guide together. In Jesus' name.
Okay, one review question. What was Pastor Raymond's definition of faith? Something plus something builds your faith.
Oh, evidence.
Evidence plus reason.
Oh, I
Okay.
didn't know that.
So this evidence We see how God directs history, we reason it through, and that increases our faith.
Yeah.